European Central Bank to make it focus on inflation, not just on inflation, but also employment and growth. They follow pretty much from the diagnosis of what I described before as the structural problems of the Eurozone itself. So that's one way. The other way is less of the Eurozone, less Europe. And that entails, I described two alternatives. One is what I call an amicable divorce. No divorce is ever amicable, but you could be more amicable, and what I describe is how it could be done in a way that causes a minimal amount of disturbance. A lot of people say, well, isn't that going to be very costly? And when I keep reminding people, the current status quo is extraordinarily costly. If you're out of a job for years and years and years, that's very costly. And so the transition would be costly, but at least there would be hope at the end of the road. The current system, there's very little hope. And then I talk about a system of a flexible euro, which keeps the ambition of a single currency, but recognize they put the cart before the horse. They weren't ready for it. It says, let's have a pause. Let's try to create the institutions that would make a single currency work. And when we can show those institutions are working by the ability to keep exchange rates roughly aligned with each other, then go ahead and finish the experiment and go back to having a single currency. I think that could work as well. And people ask, well, where do I think Europe is going to go? Political forecasting is even more difficult than economic forecasting. But I think it's pretty clear, while what I describe as what is necessary to make the euro work is not a lot economically. Far less than what we have in the United States of America. It's nothing like what we have. We have single currency that works among 50 states, but you don't need all that to make the euro work. But it is more than I think Europe is willing to have today. It's more than Germany is willing. Germany says Europe is not a transfer union. What that words mean, if you're not, what it means is we are not willing to help our neighbors. We aren't willing to transfer resources. We aren't even willing to engage in a mutual insurance agreement, because if we did that, they would take advantage of us. There's not a high level of trust. So you can't, they don't want to have common deposit insurance because they talk about moral hazard. Somebody will take advantage of us. You say, well, can't you have supervision like we have? And they say, no, we just don't trust. So they say Europe is not a transfer union, and they won't accept those ideas. So if you can't persuade Germany to accept more Europe, and as I say, more and more what you hear is that's not on the table, that means they have to go towards one of the other forms of amicable divorce or a flexible euro. More than likely, what they're going to do, though, is the current policy of muddling through. The problem with brinkmanship, which is what it is that when you are so often so close to the brink, you eventually go over the brink. A year ago, we had the Greek crisis. And everybody said, we solved the Greek crisis. But we didn't. The agreement that was pushed on Greece over the opposition of the vast majority of their citizens, 62% have voted against austerity. 62%. And they said, so much for democracy, you don't have a choice in your economic policy. And the austerity they've imposed, the result of that is their GDP has continued to go down. The depression has got worse. So eventually it will break out again. So the concern is that the euro crisis is not over. Why should Americans be concerned? Well, I think there are a whole variety of reasons why we should be concerned. I'm glad there's so many people here that express at least some concern about these issues. We live in a globally integrated world. If Europe is weak and China is weak, it's going to be very hard for us to have a strong economy. So economically, it's important. But from my point of view, what's even more important is Europe has really been a beacon in so many ways. It's been the strongest advocate for climate change, a very strong advocate for human rights. There's lots of issues that we have to work towards peace. And they have been our most important ally. But if they are totally absorbed with this, this issue of the euro, that could be solved, but they refuse to solve, then they aren't going to be able to really address adequately the bigger issues that are going to affect all of us all over the world. Thank you very much.
Oh, you did not mention Great Britain, which was not part of the Eurozone. But I'm wondering if Brexit, as it's called, will have any effect on the problems you're talking about on the continent.
Yeah, I wrote for the English edition. I wrote an afterword on Brexit because it is obviously important. And one of the questions is how was Brexit affected by the Eurozone? And I try to argue that actually the troubles across the Channel almost surely had a significant effect and may have pushed them over the line. Because you think about yourself in the UK, you're looking across the Channel, you see a dysfunctional Europe, you see Germany dominating the politics. You ask the question, do you want to be a member of that club? And a lot of people said, no, that's not a club I want to be a member of. And so you didn't, it was a close vote. And you didn't have to tilt many people's views to help lead to Brexit. The economically, it all depends. Basically, we don't know the kind of agreement that they're going to reach, and there are lots of different models out there. Norway, I should have emphasized, there are many countries in the EU that don't, not many, there are a few countries in the EU, Sweden and Denmark, that do not use the euro. And there are several other countries on the eastern side that don't use the euro. So you could be a member of the EU and not use the euro. You could be a real member of Europe, but not be part of the EU, like Norway and Switzerland. So they have a really a very quite complex set of institutional arrangements, and it's not clear which of these various forms it will take. Now, at one extreme, at one level, the United States and Canada have a lot of prosperity. We don't have free migration. We don't have, as I mentioned before, we don't have a single market, a common banking regulation. Canada's very happy that it didn't have the same bank regulators because, but we don't have a fixed exchange rate, and things work really well. I don't say really well, but they work pretty well, and that's one that's one model of how things could evolve. Another model, Juncker, who is the head of the European Commission, after in discussing where things are going to go, said, we want to give them a really, really bad deal because we want to make sure that no one else leaves. And when he said that, I thought, this is a really peculiar view, because you would have thought he would have said, we haven't sold the virtues of the European Union. It has a lot of benefits for our people. And our job was that we didn't explain those benefits well enough. But what he said is, no, there aren't any benefits. We're going to keep it together by threat. And if that's the attitude, I think things are not going to go well.
So there's quite a line of questions. We really only have about 10 or 11 minutes. So we'll try to keep your questions as short as possible, please.
Okay. Relates to your amicable divorce idea, but I wanted to turn that over. Do you think things would have turned out a lot better for the Eurozone if it had been a much smaller Eurozone right from the beginning, limiting it to countries with, as you say, similar prices, similar, I don't know, per capita GDP or whatever, a much more
Yeah.
homogeneous. And would it be better for the members of that now? Would it have turned out better for the members now of that more limited Eurozone? And would it have made things even worse for other European countries outside of the Eurozone to not have been part of the Eurozone?
No. So the two parts. One, I think a single currency among a smaller group of more similar countries would have had a much bigger chance of success. My colleague at Columbia, Bob Mundell, wrote a paper about what are the conditions under which a set of countries could share a similar currency, and he emphasized that point, the similarity of countries. Actually, I think both the countries in the single currency and the countries out of the single currency would have been better off with that formulation, because as we've seen so clearly, the countries like those in the South whose income is lower would have benefited from being able to have a lower exchange rate,
Right.
and they would have been able to export. So the answer is it would have been mutually beneficial.
Right. Thanks.
Given Euro bad, not Euro good, why did Greece stick with the Euro? Why didn't it fail?
That's a really good question. I think the answer is, talking to a lot of people in Greece, is they made they were very emotionally attached to being Europeans, and they thought that sharing that single currency was an important part of the identity of being a European. And I thought that was very foolish. You know, as I say, Sweden doesn't use the euro, and they feel very, very European. The Swiss are not even a member of the EU, and they're very European. So there are these very many arrangements, but they felt at the periphery. You have to remember, they're at the edge. For them, that badge of being that single currency turned out to have an emotional value that was not in their own interest. But the emotional content, I was at meetings where, and I explained some of the, what was going on and some of the, the choices and what, people would break out in tears. So it was an emotional issue.
Hi. We did well because we could print a lot of money and the world was forced to accept it because it was the best deal in town. Okay, but my question is this. We've got mega problems with configuration. We are running a lot less efficiently, both as human beings, economically, and so forth. How are we, as a people, as a species, going to start to move forward and change the configurations and do it in a way in